Hello and welcome to another edition of Mailbag. What is Mailbag? Well, Mailbag is a feature of the channel where you guys leave lots of comments on the channel and I attempt to answer those comments, or if I can't answer those comments, I throw it out to you guys who have more knowledge on some of this stuff than I do. So let's get into the first mailbag of this session. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. Next comment or question comes from Gary J. Robinson, aka The Death Beats. And this was in response to Roland TR-808 didn't have MIDI, but the Roland TR-909 did. Gary, who is, as you probably heard me talk about Gary in the past, he is a drum and bass producer, EDM producer, come songwriter, and he has wide experience of these drum machines, I can tell you. Anyway, he says, "Morning, mate." Obviously written in the morning. Morning, Gary. Because I'm recording this in the morning, funny enough. But enough of the frivolous nature. I can remember quite vividly that by 1992, the price of a second-hand 303, 808 and 909 had already skyrocketed thanks to the people had got used to seeing artists like Orbital and the Prodigy with them on stage and on TV and in magazines. This sent a message that you needed these boxes if you wanted to be like those guys. Let's face it, Liam Howlett kick-started the Prodigy almost entirely with a Roland W30 and a TR-909, and with a handful of synths that he would use for a time and then sell on. It was virtually those two machines that enabled him to create what we call the Prodigy sound, with a little help from a few other people, including my mate Zach Laycock, who is the guy behind the classic rave act Criminal Minds. The Detroit techno artist whose music evolved into the Chicargo House scene, Roland Chicargo House, that came out of disco and have been using the 303, 808 and 909 way before UK acid house and rave scenes kicked off, as they were essentially buying the gear from thrift stores as they were on a budget, and that's where a lot of these machines had ended up. They were a number of documentaries in which DJ Pierre and his mates tell the story how they found their TB303 in a second-hand store and were blown away by what it could do. They took it home and made the classic record Acid Tracks, which served as both the birth of acid house music, and as for the term EDM, this is somewhat uncouth abbreviation that was created by journalists in the USA around 2010 in order to pigeonhole. I love the word pigeonhole. I am not a number, I am a free man. But pigeonhole electronic music due to the popularity of dubstep at the time. Unfortunately, many young people today think that EDM is an abbreviation for commercial 4/4 electro house music and nothing more, despite the popularity of such scenes, such genres as the drum and bass, dubstep and future bass, etc., etc. There are still huge pockets of people who believe EDM is a term used to describe trashy house tunes and nothing more. As a result, EDM is considered to be somewhat uncouth term. I don't think EDM is uncouth. I mean, electronic dance music is electronic dance music, but I kind of get what you're saying. I much prefer bass music, which is often referred to as an umbrella title for connected genres such as bass house, drum and bass, dubstep, etc., etc. Cheers, Gary. Now, the first thing is, Gary's been in the business for a while, so his rendition of what was going on in the 90s is kind of, some people have contradicted this, but it's kind of what I remember, which is back in the sort of low 90s. People were going into music stores and what have you, or probably in the late 80s, I suppose, but coming into the 90s. And they would buy whatever equipment they could get their hands on at whatever. I mean, I can remember having this mono synth, and I don't know where it came from. It was a Yamaha or something or other, and it was bog awful. It was bog awful, and I picked it up for 25 £25 or something like that. It wasn't a lot of money. It was that sort of area, and I picked it up and I used it for ages because it was great because you could stick it somewhere, you know, and you could play a bass line or you could play a lead piece on it. And when it was out of the mix, it sounded awful. But actually, when you put it into the mix, it didn't sound too bad. And it was great because it just looked like another piece of equipment. You know, you could have another piece of equipment. You know, I kind of looked like Jean-Michel Jarre or Keith Emerson or Rick Wakeman, you know, with all these keyboards around me and sort of hands go tick, 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 tick. I was never as good as any of those, by the way, but it did look cool. But my journey really started in 88 and 89. That was when I got my first keyboard, so I was quite late to the scene. And as I say, being offered machines at that point, especially I was offered a drum machine. I was offered a 909, I think. No, it wasn't. It was an 808. And I really kicked myself for not buying it, because what would it be worth now? I was offered it for 50 quid or something. But you know, since problem was at that point I was far more into synths than I was into drum machines. I didn't really have the full spectrum of electronica at that point, and I kind of always kicked myself for not buying the beat machines that I was offered at the time for knockdown prices, given what they go for now. But you know, you learn by your mistakes. I said you learn something new every day. My mate, who I don't see very often. I was talking to him the other day, but he lives up in London. Of course, I now live down the south coast, and he bought a W30, and he absolutely loved the W30. I can remember going with him to buy, and I've mentioned many times on this channel about a company called or a shop called Absolute Music, and I can remember going with him to Absolute Music to buy this W30. You know, he'd been sort of saving up, and he decided that it was well. Actually, that's not true. He was going to go and buy a D70, but he realised that the D70 was rather limited compared with what the W30 could do. So that's why he bought a W30. Anyway, but unfortunately, his house was broken into about 5 years ago, and they stole his W30. So I actually, to be honest, I don't know if Paul watches this, but I did actually give him a keyboard that was not in the best state of repair, and said if you can repair it, you can use it. But he was really after a master keyboard at that point to go with his MIDI rig. Anyway, now when I was in Detroit in the late 90s, I got to meet people in Detroit or in the Detroit house scene. It was quite an education process actually, and what I found was over beers and ciggies, these guys were laying down beats using these machines, and it was the way that they were working with the machines that kind of was what I saw. Now, Detroit in the late 90s, the Detroit music scene was quite a bit different to the UK music scene, and it was quite an eye-opener. I kind of think back to those days quite often about how these guys were sort of layering up machines. There were no doors back then. Remember that there was no doors. You know, you were probably using an Amiga, or you were using an early PC, or maybe a Mac at that point if you had deep pockets. But typically, these guys were just laying down beats with a beat machine, with a bass line, with a really ropey synthesizer, and some sort of very dodgy hardware sequencer. And that's kind of how they built everything up. It was quite an eye opener. And much of this equipment they were using, I have to be honest, say, looked like it had just been, you know, pulled out of the trash can. It had seen better days. Anyway, we could debate EDM for hours. I'm honestly, you know, this channel is all about electronica, electronic dance music, electronic music making, and so I could debate it for weeks and weeks and weeks very easily. And when I went for beers with Gary before Christmas, we spent a good 2 hours just talking about the state of the industry and the instruments being used and who was using what and why. So, you know, don't get me started. If you take me for a beer and you start talking electronica, we're probably going to be somewhere for many hours and probably consume many beers if neither of us have to drive. Anyway, it definitely, you know, this whole sort of scene definitely unlocked electronica. You know, there were some landmark artists in the 80s who unlocked electronica. The 90s in the UK kind of went guitar bands, and a lot of the sort of synthesizer type bands disappeared or went underground, if you like. But they've kind of come back. You know, the keyboard is an important part of a lot of the sound that bands produce nowadays. But the creativity that was unlocked at this point, you know, ended up being played in lots of underground venues, and those underground venues became bigger underground venues as the audience began to swell. I mean, I can remember going to I can't think where it is, in London. It was under one of the arches somewhere. It wasn't around King's Cross. It was Waterloo area. It's no longer there. It's all gone. It's all been commercialised now. But back then there was a place round there, and it will only hold probably 500 people, and you had to get there if you wanted to go into this place. You had to get there fairly early, otherwise you weren't getting in. You know, it really was one in, one out type basis after that. And I can remember that being one really, really great. And it's going to bug me now because I can't think what it was called and I haven't written it in my notes. But the press tag things with whatever they think they can get away with. You know, and they create stories and spin around things. You know, they tag EDM music because it's easier for them to refer to EDM music, and most people in the mainstream don't understand what EDM is all about. And I kind of agree with that, but I think EDM is more about electronica. It's about being able to create a sound, a mood, a feeling with those electronic instruments. And you know, if you supplement those electronic instruments into a traditional band in the right way, you actually swell the music out. All you have to do is go back and look at the sort of the great artists, you know, things like Yes, Pink Floyd. You know, without the synthesizers, there is an argument the sound would never have been the sound that they got.